Welcome back, everybody. We even gathered a few more people who we didn't have before, so that's always really exciting. So, do you have any questions? I like to lead off, come back from last week's session. What are we learning? Like, what do you have any questions from last week, or anything that you discovered if you went through like the questionnaire? Anything you want me to clarify? And that goes for everybody online as well. Feel free to type in the chat.
I have a big question.
Yeah.
The soil survey thing.
Yes.
I printed out what you're supposed to do,
Yeah.
found our property, but then couldn't get any further into it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
some of that I'm sure technically.
Well, it's not the most user friendly, so it's not just you, you're not doing anything wrong. And some of the information, is gonna be extra, like you aren't gonna need to worry about it so much if you don't necessarily care about its agriculture or recreational purposes, but it's just to give you an idea of what the parent material is that's there. So I'm curious, were you able to find what the name of the soil was?
No, it said something about asking for AOI. I'm not even sure what that is, which I couldn't find.
Oh, area of interest. It's an acronym for area of interest, and what you do.
Put the address in,
Yeah.
but then I wasn't sure how to get into what the assessment is.
Do you know what we could do next week if you want?
Right.
We could use our computer to throw it to the screen.
Yeah.
And then we could walk through it so
With
so
someone,
that
that would be.
Yeah,
everyone
that would be a
knows.
great idea, and even though that one is particularly clunky, but I found there's another link, or UC Davis has a link.
That's the one I.
And it's
really easy.
easy, super easy, so what we might do is throw up
It's
later.
in the, I put several of the things that she sent in the document in the handouts folder, and I think I labeled it resources. And the UC Davis link is there, because
Is that
And is that on
my
the class then?
the class handout that, in the email that you get from us, there's a link to the handouts folder. And Michaela's PowerPoints are here in PDF form and several resources that she shared.
Right, and what I might need to do is I realize, this list I included in the resources section is different than the one in the presentation. This is the clunky version that you were trying to use, and it is a pain. So I need to update that, but
That's the one that I put.
Oh, it is?
For the res-
Okay.
That's what I put on the resources
Okay.
from the slides.
So maybe we can use the more simple link and we can walk through it next week, because it should be fairly simple. I don't want you to use that version, it's too cumbersome.
And guys, if you don't have, when I send out the recording for today, I'll have to link in there again, so if you don't have last week's email with the recording,
So
we'll get it again.
should we be receiving an email from you in our personal email?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but whatever you decide, that's for this
Form,
class.
email.
So,
After last week's session, I signed up for the Shore Rivers Atkins Arboretum program that they're doing. It's a speaker series. It's only $5. If you're an HOA member, this is free. They intended it really for HOAs, and it was started, it kicked off this last Sunday. And it was a marvelous discussion, a good PowerPoint that they kind of ran through that people can use with their HOAs to help educate them. But also getting some discussions about what might work. And I think one of the things that's on here, in fact, on the newsletter that came out yesterday, you probably saw, you probably saw an advertisement for it, kind of looked like this, that Atkins sent me, and I linked it to their resource page where they're putting all their information. And what we're going to try and do is start taking pictures where native plants have been used very successfully, no matter where, so that it gives people ideas on that resource page. But these two stuff into it are on the back table. So when you go up to look at those plants, you can grab one. And I just took as many as they had, but there's plenty of these, not so many of these, but this is also a pretty handy document, and it has resources on the back.
Oh, yeah, just
helped if I turn it on.
Yeah.
Oops.
Forgot to remind you.
I'm sorry, you had a question?
Oh, just about, our lot, is okay, we have a lot of fill dirt all around the house, do I have organic soil?
I would put construction material. Because, and that's good to note though, because it means, you're gonna have a disturbed soil regime. You might not know what the parent material is, especially if they're bringing it in and trucking from somewhere else. It's probably gonna take time to rebuild that soil, particularly that organic layer on top, which is where most plants draw their nutrients from.
Right.
So yeah, and so if you were doing an assessment, that's probably what I would write down is new construction, soil could fill, I might note if it were gravelly, like if you're finding large pieces of rock, that might be helpful to know. But you're gonna keep in your head that when you do go to plant, you're probably gonna have to do a big addition of either topsoil and compost or just compost, something to help keep it nutritious, because it's probably depleted, that material. And that happens, with most construction, that's gonna happen. And in the case of like where Lynn lives,
Like
which
20 years later, I'm still digging
Right.
concrete, soda cans, all kinds of
That's
crazy stuff out of the soil that was just left, and then when they dumped some new soil on top to plant things.
so a lot of soil has been brought in, from somewhere else, or what they've done is they stripped everything, the topsoil that was there,
They did that
built,
first.
and then they come in and bring in either cheaper topsoil or just something from somewhere else.
We've spent the last 8 years amending soil.
Yeah. And that's particularly around the houses, that could be the case for the whole property, but it doesn't necessarily mean the whole property, is that way. Yeah, really good questions. And actually, while we're on that topic of your house, Lynn and I have been discussing our field trip for Friday. And we were gonna kind of get a panel from everybody to see what times would work best. I think what we're gonna end up doing is going to Easton Club East and seeing a couple examples of native plants that have been put in the landscape, and good examples of working with areas that have HOAs, to have a more native landscape. So I think we were looking, and I don't know if these times work for you, 10 to 11 is my first option, and then the second option would be like this past time, so 1 to 2 p.m.
1 to 2 is gonna be hot.
Exactly, which is why I think the morning option might be preferable.
Yeah. We can go earlier if you want. Sue's house, we'll be parking at, I'll send everybody directions. We'll be parking at the clubhouse at Easton Club East, and then walking from there. It's not a lot of walking, but the first place is a completely different style of native plant garden. And then the next place would be mine, which has a native plant garden in the yard, but also a mini meadow. So,
What time are you guys?
so I would say no later than starting at 10.
I agree. And I can, if people want to do earlier, like 9 to 10, we can do that too.
Yeah. I would,
Yes, 9 to 10, people prefer that? I don't know if anybody online is planning to come, sounds good, Karen says, okay.
So
Yeah, let's do 9 to 10 then. I like that because I am not a heat person, and so I was really hoping nobody was gonna say 1.
I'm not
It's tough, I know. I am a gardener who doesn't like this.
So where's Easton Club East? I don't know.
Easton Club East, yeah, we'll send out, kind of like a map. It's on, it's off the east side of Route 50 off of Dutchman's Lane.
It's like,
Go past the
it's
Royal
8
Farm.
minutes away from here.
It's really not far, yeah. Like if you took Peach Blossoms or wherever we are and then just kept going. Or wait, I'm sorry, no, you would take a block down and then it's off of Dutchman.
Yeah. It's easy.
Yeah, well, and we'll send directions to everybody, I can make up a map or something.
Yeah, I can send directions. We've done this many times, so.
That's right.
So we'll all send directions out to everybody in class through just regular email.
And Bill, you have a question?
No, I took Meals on Wheels Friday morning. so-
Okay,
so I
oh,
can't
I'm
do it.
sorry.
I might try and see if I can get something to switch, but it's kind of late now.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Well, how about we videotape for you?
Actually, I have to help my daughter move,
Okay.
so Friday morning's out, so if you're videotaping,
Yeah.
I'd like
We
to,
can try and do that.
I'd like to have a video.
I'm gonna be in Ohio, so
She's
I
not
don't
gonna
know.
be here.
So that's fine. I'll try to do a little video recording and so you can get an idea of what it looks like, a little like surround, do a little voiceover.
Okay, let's go the address.
The address, yeah, we'll send it.
Please drive by.
Yeah, we'll send it out to everybody's driveway. Just peering into your yard, it's okay.
You know, you're welcome to stop and knock, and I give people tours of that yard all the time in my effort to help people understand about native plants.
I have some people that live out there, so maybe it's one of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions from last week? Before we switch gears and actually, so we, yes, I'm sorry, Trina. Is there a question?
I had a chat. Mary C says that she can do that.
Oh, excellent. All right. So we set the base last week. We talked about native plants kind of in general, talking about how growing conditions will influence and really help you decide what you choose to put in certain spaces. And now this week, we're concentrating on the wildlife side of things. So even though I'm going to be talking mostly about beneficial insects and pollinators, we'll talk a little bit about birds as well, just because it's all interconnected. It's all relative. So we're putting the pieces together slowly. Like why native plants are so critical. We've learned all about, you know, why they need certain growing conditions, but why should we plant them at all? And this is my yard. And for me, planting native plants just isn't enough, you know, that it's good looking. It has to serve a function or a purpose to me. And there's no greater function or purpose than ecology. You know, feeding the wildlife, interacting with these different pieces. You know, wildlife are super dependent on what we provide for them. You know, after we've changed the landscapes by building or, you know, putting in grass or whatever, we might not see them anymore if we put in those kinds of landscapes. So how do we bring them back? The good news is we can bring them back. We can kind of plant it and they will come, so to speak. And I was so excited because a couple of years ago, this was my first box turtle that took up residence. And this is like my front bed, like right next to the front steps. And it's the first time I've had a turtle like really take up residence. But certainly, you know, I have no shortage of bee visitors, as well as a lot of butterflies, and I plant a lot of things that are host plants for those butterflies, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then I try and put up signage so that I can demonstrate to my neighbors. I'm not just messy gardening, although there's no problem with that. I'm not just messy gardening, I'm gardening with sort of a purpose, and I really do think that helps, particularly if you live in an HOA or you have neighbors that are concerned about what you do on your property. It kind of helps tell a story, and it's a good conversation piece. Yeah, Trina.
Quick question,
Yeah.
box turtle. We found a box turtle in our pond a few days ago. Oh, did he go in there on purpose or?
Probably, yeah. Most turtles are both terrestrial and aquatic.
Okay.
Normally, they don't like live in the water, like red sliders
Right.
or things like that. But
Well, we're getting ready to change our liner, it's just a small pond. And so the water's down low, so we wondered if he came too close and fell in. And luckily I heard him.
possible.
So, but he was just kind of like, yeah, this is all right. It was a really hot day, so.
Oh man, well maybe
We
that's
got
why
it
then.
off. We put him in the woods.
And usually they will source their nests somewhat away from water, but they always do
They
need
want
a water
close.
source. Yeah, they do need to still
And
kind
Howard
of.
said, I drank last year, what happened?
Right.
We had a hole in our liner, so.
Oh dear. So, you know, we lived in this social standard for so long that lawns have to look a certain way, landscapes have to look a certain way, and be planted with certain plants that aren't necessarily indigenous. So part of my job is to convince people that behavior change is possible, and it starts with us. It starts with us in our backyards, again, as conversational pieces, and telling people why we do this, and that there's a higher purpose for what we plant. We can contribute back to the environment, just even in our backyards, which is a really powerful thing, I think, for homeowners to realize, because there's, you know, lots of downer things in the world today. But so if you do anything, you know, feel free to bump the standards. It's okay. Leave the leaves. We'll talk about why that's important. Wait to cut back your perennials, you know, leave those in the winter. I think people are so eager, or landscaping companies are so eager to kind of scalp the landscape right before winter, and then there's nothing there. all that season. There's nothing interesting to look at. There's no cover for any of the critters that live there. Leaves, hollow stems, and cavities, those are critical habitat for a lot of our flying insects. And then building natural gardens, building gardens that have those native plants and kind of support the native ecology. I am giving you permission, official permission to be a lazy gardener. And that's what I tell people. I'm like, I'm not lazy, I'm environmental. So it's kind of like, we have to change that mentality because it's not being lazy. It's not that I don't want to pick up the leaves. It's that the leaf litter is there because it serves an important function. And when I clear it off or take it away, I'm taking away the cocoons of insects. I'm taking away that insulating layer that a lot of bumblebees need in order to survive winter. So it's okay to be a lazy gardener. I'm saying it's okay. And if you can, ditch the lawn. If that lawn's not serving much purpose, or it's struggling in a certain location where you've been trying to grow grass for a long time, feel free to get rid of it. If you're not using it, something better could probably be growing there.
I have a question for you,
Yeah,
and you know our property.
yeah.
We've got a couple acres of loblolly pines, which I didn't know that I was allergic to until I moved here.
Oh
But
boy.
they are covered with poison ivy, English ivy. I talked about hiring your goats, and you said even they're smart enough not to
Yeah.
English ivy.
Yeah.
Virginia creeper, and then vines that have yet to be planted.
Yeah.
Should we let those vines go, which are climbing the trees, which ultimately will kill the tree? Or do I need to try to get in there and tackle 3 trees a year? And by the time I'm done, I mean, I might have them finished by 110, but what do we do? Or do we bring in a hedge thing or try to dig everything out?
So I would prioritize those 3 species you mentioned. The poison ivy technically is native, but I tend to clear it out if I can. But I say probably leave that for now because that's a human health hazard. And I certainly don't want you getting poison ivy unless you're well suited and prepared to kind of handle it. Because you can still get poison ivy from cut branches in winter and stuff. So I'd say leave that. I did the Virginia creeper too. It's usually not vigorous enough that it's going to harm the tree's growth and health. It's a very weak-rooted vine. It's pretty easy to pull, but it's also one of our top plants for wildlife and for birds. And so it's not going to grow so vigorously that it's going to take down the trees. The English ivy is what I would focus on.
Then what is one of the other big ones, like huge stems? It's not the poison ivy.
Probably trumpet vine.
No, it's not trumpet.
No, it's not trumpet vine.
All right, I'll.
Okay, we'll talk because I'm done.
I know, you can pop down, bring the kids, go to school.
Yeah, and even trumpet vine is a native and doesn't wrap and constrict like a lot of the other vines will. So usually it doesn't harm the trees unless it gets so big that it's like this. Yeah, correct.
I missed what the third one was, English ivy.
Oh, English ivy, yeah, so English ivy is very damaging to trees, and so if you're going to pick one vine to sort of control, I wouldn't even say.
Sorry, I heard English ivy and poison ivy, what was the third?
Oh, I'm sorry, Virginia creeper.
Virginia creeper.
It's actually on this handout that I handed out.
Got
Yeah.
it, thank you, I just didn't hear it.
That's fine. And so the English ivy, what I normally recommend to people is you don't want to pull it off the trees because that is very strongly rooted. And when you pull off the bark of trees, that's the living layer of the tree. And so you don't want to pull off the bark, it damages the tree. You cut out like a 12 to 18-inch sections, low, kind of near the ground. And you clear the vines away from the bark that way, and then if it's my property, I paint a little bit of herbicide on the base of those vines, because it kills the English ivy. If you just cut it and leave it, it's probably gonna come back. And even using an herbicide, doesn't guarantee it wouldn't come back a little bit, but it helps ensure, that it.
So what kind of herbicide do you use?
You can use a concentrated form of glyphosate. You can also use anything that's kind of rated as a brush or woody vine killer. And usually that is like it's called triclopyr. I think that's the active ingredient name. Now the active ingredient is different than the brand name. So if you Google triclopyr, you might come up with a bunch of different brand names. But as long as it's rated for use on woody vines, you can probably use it. Yeah, good question. All right, so as we're looking at our pollinators, they're kind of like humans, right? They have basic needs. They need food, which is usually in the form of flowers that provide nectar and pollen. I'm sorry, is there a question online?
Yes, sorry,
Yes.
Mary is asking, do you have suggestions for a ground cover that could replace a lawn in this area?
Yes, many. And we probably covered it a little bit last week, but you know what, Mary, I'll follow up with you because I know your property as well. And so we might be able to come up with some narrowed down solutions for ground covers for a particular spot. Does that sound good? I can come over sometime. Mary lives across the road from me. We can come over sometime and take a look. All right, so
And a really unique ground cover that Janet Tiernan uses is she used the coral honeysuckle on the ground.
oh,
So
interesting.
that actually works because it blooms all summer long.
And it kind
It
of
provides good cover for insects
kind
and,
of lumps.
yeah.
Does it not act like other honeysuckles? I'm forever trying to get rid of honeysuckles.
It's not as aggressive as the Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then she just planted she planted it on slopes.
Right.
So it helps them keep maintaining the slope.
And if you have a sunnier or drier slope, I like it's called Bruce aromatica grow low. It's,
I got that all over my yard.
well, then we're gonna see it on Friday,
There's
so.
actually some outside.
There is, yeah.
Wait, say it again.
It's called fragrant sumac, and the variety name is grow low, and grow is spelled GRO. And it's just a low growing woody shrub. And it's in the sumac family, so, but it looks very different than like the sumacs you're thinking about. And it has beautiful fall color, it has great wildlife value, and it will spread out. I think it has a spread of something like 6 feet. Does that sound right?
Well, mine's
Or
going
maybe-
up and out. So
You know.
I used it in the meadow to help provide structure for the grasses.
Oh, nice.
So the
Yeah.
grasses kind of took over. You'll see.
That's what they do. That's what they do. So yeah, for our pollinators, what we need to do in order to attract them, we need to build it for them. We need to provide food. They need shelter, and that can be in the form of overwintering habitat. So like bunch grasses, meadows are great for that. Nesting sites if they need a nesting site. So brush piles for a lot of birds.
Isn't that for nesting too for the?
Oh, yep, nesting sites for bees, and we'll talk about that too. Those are just some examples. And then a freshwater source, which is something that we don't always think about, but bird baths count. I actually really love this example on the far right. That's a bee bath. And what it is it's a very shallow container with water in it, but it has a lot of stones that kind of pop up out of the water. Because bees need something to rest on in order to gather the water. If it's too big or too deep, they can't access the water. They need a place to land. And you'll actually find a lot of dragonflies will use sources like this as well because they love to perch. And they, now, we do get a lot of questions about mosquitoes. And what I say is either if you can get on a cycle of cleaning it out pretty regularly, or if it's a source that you're gonna have to leave for a while, using the mosquito dunks is super easy. And I know we talked about the bucket of mosquito dew
Will
last
will
week.
the dunk hurt the insects?
No, because they're not laying their eggs in it.
Oh.
And if it
Those are the
affects,
little round discs you can buy.
yeah, they look like little donuts. They
Yeah.
call them briquettes sometimes, maybe. Or, and you can break them up into smaller pieces so that you aren't using a whole one. Like a whole one does a big area. And I'm curious, did anybody try the mosquito bucket that we talked about?
I've got 3 of them.
I've got 2 of them, and I think they're working. I mean, I'm not to no mosquito bites, but
Well, when I open it up, I don't see any larvae, but
Right.
I'm guessing that once it kills the larvae, it probably,
Always.
yeah. But it's, but we haven't had nearly the mosquito problem that we have had the last years.
So it might be a little early yet, because normally I get tore up. The mosquito, I think there's a whole thing, a theory about certain people attract more mosquitoes, and that's me. So I'm your mosquito assurance. I go walking with my family and they love it, because they don't see a single mosquito I get home.
Sorry,
Yeah.
we had this discussion with Carl. What word are you using? Is it dunk? D-U-N-K?
Dunk, yeah, D-U-N-K. Did you, what was the other word?
We heard dump and we heard.
Dump. Well, you do dump. You do dump the bucket eventually when it's like out of commission, when it's kind of aged out, you dump it, but it's dump.
The little ones that, I got them at Amazon because we were trying to divert some water and I know the basin's gonna catch it and I don't want mosquitoes. But I thought, oh, no, we've got so many, I'm gonna have to buy 2. I have enough to last the rest of my lifetime because they're this big around, but you can cut them in like quarters
Yeah.
or small. But anywhere you have standing water, you can put one of those in and supposedly you don't get
It
the
works
larva.
for about a month.
Yeah, they don't last indefinitely, it's not like one will last you the whole summer, but I think a month is actually quite good. Yeah, especially for non-chemical approach. And even though bees and butterflies are very charismatic, and that's what I talk a lot about, it's not just about the bees and the butterflies. There are so many beneficial insects, especially in the order Coleoptera, which is the beetle order. This order is the largest one on the planet, it has the most number of species. And so we often forget about beetles because they're crawling on the ground and we kind of ignore them. But they're really critical and important. So if you're seeing a lot of beetle activity, that's a good thing, unless it's Japanese beetle, that's bad. But we also have predatory flies, and we call these bee mimics because you look at that black and white striping and your mind might instantly go, oh, that's a bee. Well, nature does that too. They do that as a defense mechanism. They don't want things eating them. And they want things to leave them alone. But this particular syrphid fly, it's also called the flower fly because they're attracted to similar flowers like other pollinators. They have larvae that are predatory and will eat aphids and other kind of soft-bodied insects that we don't want to see necessarily in our garden. But we also forget that flies are great pollinators. They're incredible flyers. You ever try and catch one in your hand? You can't do it. And I know because I've been killing a lot of flies in my kitchen lately and failing hard at it. So they're really good flyers. They're attracted to flowers that tend to be on the stinkier side. So I'm thinking like pawpaw or skunk cabbage. Those are primarily pollinated by fly species. Bees won't really be attracted to it. It may also attract beetles, which do like that stinky smell as well. There's a specific word for beetle pollination, and I can't remember what it is right now, but there's just, you know.
Now, are those the ones that you said, the flower fly?
Flower fly,
Now,
yep.
is that something that you can import, like parasitic wasps and those kinds of things?
I don't know if you can purchase them. I've never looked it up. It wouldn't surprise me if you could. Like, you know, you can buy the ladybugs and release them, but I usually don't recommend that. That's not usually very effective, especially because they tend to come in on their own anyway. So you just kind of wait for them to show up. Now these guys are super active right now. These are the goldenrod soldier beetles. And I don't know if it's a bumper crop year for them or what, but I have been seeing them everywhere. And I've had lots of people call me to ask about what to do to control these. No, don't control those. They're not going to eat the plants. Their larvae are also predators of soft-bodied insects that you don't want to see, like aphids. So the more of them we see this year, I hope that means that we get some really good larvae from these guys this year because they're going to eat a lot of the things I don't want. All right, so and there's also wasps that we don't talk about, and I'm not talking about yellow jackets or paper wasps, which are angry and will, you know, sting you. There's so many solitary wasps that are very beneficial, and I think people are afraid of them, but they could care less about humans, and are not actually adapted to sting us unless you grabbed it in your hand and squeezed, which nobody should do. I don't know if I showed this last week, but this is a compilation of Doug Tallamy's research about what genus of species support the most number of lepidopterans. And I know we talked a little bit about that. Lepidopterans are caterpillars. And caterpillars are that critical role where insects supporting the food webs, because a lot of birds need caterpillars to feed their young. So we use it as kind of like a keystone species of what's ecologically important. And these were the 20 most valuable woody and perennial native plants. I know I told you oaks are going to be at the top of that list with 534 species. of caterpillar supported. And then, of course, perennials are much smaller, so these numbers are also smaller, but the plants that are in the top 5 are goldenrods, asters, sunflowers, Joe Pye weeds or boneset, which make a lot of my list, and then morning glories of all things. And not the non-native morning glories, because those are very aggressive. But yeah, so this is interesting data for me, because it really proves that there are certain native plants that are much better and more supportive of wildlife than our non-natives. And I think I quizzed you about this last week, so I'm sorry, I ruined the quiz already, but when we compare oak trees to crepe myrtles in terms of, they're both trees, crepe myrtle only supports one caterpillar, and it's a pest. Boxwoods also only support one caterpillar, and it's a pest, compared to blueberry, which is of a similar size, supports 288, that's a lot. And then if we're comparing the Andina to anything, Andina doesn't do anything for caterpillars, so 0. And yet, there's a lot of Andina in the landscape. And in fact, yes, they produce berries, but those berries are toxic to birds in high amounts, which is why cedar waxwings can actually die from eating too many of these berries because they don't know when to stop. They just eat until they're stuffed. So,
When you say blueberry, you're talking like blueberry bushes.
Wow.
yeah, Vaccinium. So that's the genus name. Now we have quite a few native Vaccinium species, but even the non-natives, I do believe, still support a lot of non-native blueberries. I'm sorry, non-native blueberries will also support a lot of these species as well. And now, again, when I talk to people about native plants versus invasive, why it's important to remove those invasives out of the environment, because don't those invasives produce berries that birds eat too? Well, yes, in a nutshell, but when we compare the nutritional value of those non-native species, and these are berries, percent of fat is a really important factor for birds because they need to survive winter, right? They're always expending energy, and so they need stores in order to not burn through that stuff so much. So if they're eating non-native berry species in lieu of native stuff, they're losing a lot of that energy. That's pretty dramatic difference between the native percentage of fat versus non-native. We use multiflora rose as an example, less than 1%, all of them are almost less than 1%. Even these two that are higher at the bottom, so the autumn olive and the oriental bittersweet, they're only like 2.5% compared to Virginia creeper, which we were just talking about, which is 23% fat. So this is a nice visual. This is data I use to prove to people that native plants are far superior in terms of wildlife value.
It's too bad that somebody, when in Northern California, I noticed it a lot that around the wineries, that what they did was they put in plain old roses. On those two, the ones, what do they call them, South roses.
Yeah.
And it's too bad that they didn't put native shrubs in instead.
Now, what I think they do that, there's a reason they do that, and it's usually because those are trap crops for pest species, because the pest species, and I don't know if it's Japanese beetle, but it might be something else, they're attracted to the rose, and then they can spray and treat the roses instead of treating all of the vines.
And so it's a health indicator of how
Right.
their vineyard is
Right.
they're going. That's why there's one at the end of every row.
Right. And I believe roses are sensitive to herbicides just like grapes are. They're called a sensitive crop. So they're an indicator if there's drift or something, something amiss. It's something they can use as an indicator species.
Like fungus or something.
That
I'm trying to remember
too.
what it was in a vineyard.
Yeah, but the roses are selected for a reason. It's just not an environmental risk.
Can you totally move off of berries?
Yeah.
Pokeweed.
Oh,
What?
pokeweed
Do I
is,
wanna keep killing that, cause I
Hopefully
do?
it has some value.
it does have some value. Pokeweed actually does have a lot of.
Toxic too, so.
Yeah, but so is almost everything if you eat it. This tomato, if you eat the leaves, that's toxic.
Okay.
We eat the
So
fruits,
there
but
are-
not.
There are animals and pollinators and stuff.
Yeah.
Because the berries look really good, but when I looked them up one time, it said that they're incredibly toxic.
I mean, like if your dog has a habit of just eating anything it sees in the landscape, I would say maybe control it because they'll make themselves sick. But if they leave it alone, I wouldn't worry about it too much. You can limit the number if it's just becoming overwhelming, but don't feel bad about leaving it. They do have some cool wildlife value.
Could you briefly talk to Devil's Walking Stick, which I know apparently can grow phenomenally, which.
Don't you have it on your property?
Oh, my God, no.
I know you do.
It's all over.
Yeah,
It's high value?
very high value. It supports, I think, over 48 species of birds.
Is that
So when I bump into it and then I'm reminded it's there.
Yeah, you know,
Little frogs.
it's one of those plants where you have to strike the balance of human health and value and then environmental value too.
Is it like,
Here, I'll show you.
No, it's a woody plant and it's one big stem which makes it look like a walking stick, but it's covered in thorns.
Oh.
It has huge leaves. Oh, I'll bring one in next time because there's lots in our area.
Yeah, they're all over.
Yeah, no, it is high wildlife value. It produces a lot of berries that birds love. Now, if it's creeping too close to like where the kids are playing or something, you can certainly chop down, because there's enough of them. They form kind of these like colonies of mini stems. You can cut some down. It's okay.
A lot of fun.
I'll give you permission to.
Thank you.
They're quite neat, actually. But yeah, I can see why you wouldn't want it popping up in your garden.
Yeah.
All right, so as we switch gears to bees, often we use honeybee because it's a very charismatic bee, and I do love honeybees. Okay, I have no problem with honeybees, and we use them in agriculture, right? Like we keep them, they're beekeeping. But honeybees are not native, and there's only 8 species out of the genus Apis, which is the honeybee genus. Comparatively to our native bees, just in Maryland, we have about 430 species of native bees, and some that haven't even been discovered yet. And if we look at the US as a whole, 4,000 native bees. So that's a lot of diversity compared to the 8 that we kind of like farm, right? And they come in all different shapes and sizes. They're so unique and so cute. They're so fuzzy. And so they have different needs when it comes to feeding as well. I don't know if I talk about it today, but there are short-tongued bees and long-tongued bees. And just like the name implies, the long-tongued bees can usually access flowers that are longer or deeper or tubular in shape. But then the short-tongued bees, those tend to belong to tinier bees. They're gonna need flowers that are more open, like anything in the aster family. It's very accessible food for most insects, so that's why you see them covered in insects so often, is because it's easy to get to. And I would probably go for the easiest factor as well. So just keeping in mind that we plant that diversity of native species because our insects have so many different needs. So if we're looking at, this is sort of extrapolated from the Audubon Society and Doug Tallamy's work that we just looked at a moment ago. If you were going to rank the top 5 plants for caterpillars, we'd be looking at oaks, cherries, and we have a lot of native cherries here, willows, very popular with caterpillars, birches, and poplars. None of those are unfamiliar because they all grow natively here, luckily. And then if we're looking at berry-producing shrubs and vines, you'll notice the top 3 are all dogwood, shrub dogwoods, not the flowering dogwood, which is a tree. Also high value, but the shrubby ones actually have a lot more services. And then southern arrowwood viburnums. So viburnums tend to be very good for wildlife, and I have 2 as a giveaway today. Oh wait, I'm sorry, just 1. There's just 2 meters on it. So I have 1 as a giveaway today, in case anybody wants one. And then Virginia creeper, what we just talked about. So very high wildlife value for berries. So what can we do at home? What can we do to attract them and keep these insects on our properties? So I like to focus on plant and season variety, and we'll cover seasons a little bit more next week. And you know what, just planting even just 1 plant can go a long way. So don't feel like it's too overwhelming to try and renovate your entire yard, or you have to take out all of your grass. You don't have to do those things. Just start small. And I'm all about experimentation, okay? So try something, and if it doesn't work, try something else. Or if it does work, then you continue to kind of build on what successes you have. Use native plants and avoid invasive ones. I think we've covered that pretty well. And then if possible, avoid pesticide use because there's a lot of non-target organisms that can be affected by that, right? All those bees we talked about. And this is just an example of plants that bloom across different seasons. And this is kind of how they're listed, is from early season to mid to late. This is all Xerces Society. And the link for this, I believe, will be in the resources. We'll link to that. And this is for the Mid-Atlantic area. The Xerces Society has a lot of resources across the entire United States. So they have these lists for the Midwest or the Northeast. So if you have a house somewhere else, you can find a list for it.
The water needs column is really helpful too.
Yes.
Because, as you experiment in your yard, you'll see a plant that looks like it's wilting and not doing well, so you
Right.
water, right? Sometimes that's exactly the opposite of what you should have done. We have a tendency to overwater native plants, but when you look at those, it's good to combine them in groupings that are similar in terms of their water needs.
And it will also influence, this might help you influence what species to choose over another. Let's say you have a wetter environment. Well, you might want to plant Joe Pye weed instead of butterfly milkweed because butterfly milkweed likes really dry. And so it's not going to do well in a wetter area. Well, not lobelia, I'm sorry. Joe Pye weed will be much more happy in that wetter environment.
What's the name of the society that you?
Xerces, it's spelled Xerces.
Thank you.
And they have almost an overwhelming amount of resources, but if you look at, I think this is called like a seasonal calendar for pollinators, this should come up. All right. So biodiversity, not just different species, but different types of plants. So not just, flowering perennials, you want those layers, you want trees if you can. I realize space is sometimes a limiting factor. Trees if you can, shrubs if you can, taller perennials, lower perennials, so you can reach all those different hierarchies of insect needs, and different ages too. So, I know in popular practice, and it's okay if you have this on your property, is planting one species in a straight row, and then that's it. You do that one species, it's all the same age. If something happens to one of those trees and you have to take it out, it's going to look glaringly obvious, right, that something's missing. Even if you replace it, now that tree is a different age than all the rest and it looks differently. So if you can mix and not plant in straight lines if you can help it, that will really help keep it from being a problem down the line, being a design problem. And again, we'll cover that next week because design is going to be kind of the emphasis. And again, mixing flower types and shape. Different colors. There are certain colors that are attractive to hummingbirds, like red. So cardinal flower, right? And bees. Bees see in a different light spectrum than we do. They can see ultraviolet color. There are certain flowers that have ultraviolet runways on their petals to kind of be a signal to bees, like here, land here. It's just like the lighting strip on a runway. So it's really fascinating. Those are the plants you're going to want to support that bee activity because they can see them a lot more easily. We can't see it, but they can. So it's really interesting. And use regional native plants if possible. It's not always a possibility for us. And I'm sorry, I know that's kind of hard to read, but you can definitely check it out in the PDF. This is just some suggestions as we look at different plant families. So we look at the carrot family, the mint family, there's the native recommendation above, and then there's the non-natives below. So I'll mix a lot of non-native stuff into my landscape because they're so supportive of insect activity. And you'll find a lot of things love the mint flowers. So feel free to incorporate a lot of that into your landscape. In fact, I have both basil and lemon balm with me to give away as well today. I use bribes very shamelessly, so sorry everybody online, but feel free to take some of these today. And here's just an example of some of the biodiversity that you can see in the landscape just by planting different kinds of flowers. This is my favorite bee of all time. It's called the longhorned bee because it has, the males have really long antennae that make it look like a longhorn. They are so adorable. And what they're doing here, these are all males, because the females are busy laying their eggs, building their nests. The males, the eligible bachelors, they'll all come together and kind of aggregate around flowers, and they clasp the stem of the flowers and they all sleep together. So this is them resting at the end of the day. I know, it's adorable, okay? So, like, this is the stuff we miss when we just focus on the honeybees. But certainly, you know, there's a lot of bumblebees. This is a leaf cutter bee, which you'll notice has very intimidating looking mandibles. It's kind of hard to see. But they're, you know, they're harmless. They could care less about humans. These are all solitary bees. Meaning they do not have a colony, they don't make honey, so they don't have a queen per se, they don't have a social hierarchy. Some can be what we call eusocial, which they'll have many females that kind of live near each other, but they'll have their own progeny, they'll have their own young, sometimes they even raise them together. It's really complex and very interesting in the bee world. And then lots of solitary wasps. I think this is a potter wasp. So that's what makes those little like mud pieces up in the corners of houses and in the eaves and stuff. Again, solitary insect, doesn't care about you. All it cares about is gathering pollen and nectar and creating its nests. They'll actually pack dead spiders into their nests so that their larvae have something to feed on when they hatch. Interesting fun fact.
Where do they build their nests?
Pretty much anywhere. So yeah, you like exposed beams, like if you have a garage that's not insulated or sheds and stuff. And you can take them down if they're in a really bad place, but honestly they're very beneficial and
Do they
they're
reuse the same nest? Oh, okay, so
No,
what I took
seasonal.
down, nobody cared about.
So,
What about carpenter bees?
yeah. And that's they are native and technically we're not supposed to kill them, but I do understand that they're a problem for So they don't like painted or treated wood, but they are programmed to go back to wherever they were born. So even if you replace the wood from where they were born or you put in plastic, they will come back to it. They're like a homing beacon. And they're not very smart. Okay, so they bump into things, they're harmless, they're just intimidating because they're so big. But yes, if they have untreated wood, like in a big barn or shed, they will come back to it year after year, and they'll excavate a hole if there's not one already. And it's amazing, you can hear them chewing the bit, it's fascinating. If you want more information, we'll talk later.
I just wanna know how to deter them.
I know. Painted wood, treated wood, they can't go through it.
If they get in your house,
Like by accident, or they're nesting
they're
inside?
nesting inside,
Oh,
they're in our bedroom
Oh.
closet, I can hear, I think, bees, and we did have some that were in a place horizontal, behind the desk.
Can they live with, they can't
Can
get
they
inside
live
and get top?
Not really, yeah, I guess my question is if you think they're coming from the outside, like under a soffit or something, or if they came in from the inside. If they came in from the inside, I would just capture them and release them outside and that'll solve the issue. But if you think there's an exterior hole that they're coming through, I'd have somebody come and seal it and try and close it up so they don't come back.
I was gonna say, you're hearing that sounds like it's a whole mess.
Right, and you gotta be careful because there's European hornets that will nest sometimes in the walls of places. And they will sting, the carpenter bees won't, but, yeah. Question?
is there a way to deter honeybees legally?
I'm sorry, it depends. So what do you mean by deter?
Well,
You can deter them.
they built a very large nest in our
Oh.
chimney, and of course, our house is full of bees. And
Oh, okay.
So,
Currently?
no,
Okay.
this was last summer.
Okay.
But we just lit a fire, is that okay?
That breaks my heart.
I understand out of the house.
I understand that.
I'm gonna live in the
Right, right. No, and I get that. So, legally, we're not supposed to kill, bees.
Well, I think they just flew away.
Yeah, I'm sure they did.
They don't
Yeah,
get
they
out.
did.
At least they didn't.
So,
You can get people to come, they'll come
yeah, I
and
was gonna
they'll
say.
come and take the hive.
And what some people do is if there's a swarm or something, sometimes people call my office and there's a connection of beekeepers across the state, and there's like a call service where you can ask them to come and if they want to get the bees for free, and sometimes they will. If it's in a really hard spot like that though, I'm not sure you
Really
have
high up,
to.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's tricky. And you can have I won't say a pest service, but they might even be able to help you at least get it out. They are not supposed to spray for them.
Oh, yeah, they say they don't
Yeah.
have bees.
Yeah.
They are.
You don't do
Yeah.
So we get a question, this is sort of tangential, it's not bees, it's
Oh.
birds. Bird nests, throughout the season.
Right.
And an HOA will come along, and somebody got written up because they had all these bird nests all around their house.
Uh-oh.
They probably had some on their, the front door, sometimes robins will put a nest there.
Right.
Different places that are on the house, but apparently that was what I heard was reported. But the question then became, well, how do you remove them and when?
Right.
I've had to remove a nest before, it was a robin.
Right.
Technically, they're not a native. They're native, so you have to be careful. I waited until the eggs were out, and then I took the nest down. But people will go, well, how can I do that? Well, you kind of have to, because if eggs are in there, you are legally not supposed to touch it.
Yeah.
So,
And there's the Migratory Bird Act where you can't kill any bird that's
especially
protection.
anything that's coming from Canada down through the US, basically.
Now starlings are exempt from that.
Yes, starlings and
And what is it?
the house
The house
sparrow.
sparrow. Yeah, those are the ones that kill the bluebirds, right?
Yeah, they take over
The
their
house sparrows, yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful, and I would do exactly that. If there's no eggs in the nest, I wouldn't feel bad. I mean, I do feel bad
Well,
about
yeah,
it.
because you have to clean the nest box.
Right, and they will, and keep an eye on it too, because they will try and come back and rebuild, but after a certain amount of time, if so many times the nest is cleared out.
That
they don't-
Robin did, and so every day I would I would dump off all this stuff.
Right,
She
I
was
feel
very
bad.
putting up.
I had to
She
say,
finally gave up.
hey, the basket, or kept trying to.
That's right.
And I kept taking it on.
And they'll have
You're right at the
several,
front door, Donnie.
right, and they'll have several broods, and they'll go pretty quickly, so normally you don't have to wait. But I always forget to clean up my bluebird boxes in between fledglings, and then by the time I go check, it's too late, so, yeah. But they seem to do just fine. All right, so if we're talking about insect activity, these are also my top ranking 5 plants. For native bees, you'll notice bergamot is at the top, no surprise, bee balm. Black-eyed Susans, that's one of those plants that have the ultraviolet petals I talked about, really cool. The only one that's not native to here, but it is native to the US, is purple prairie clover. That's more of a Midwest plant, but it is really cool, so if you do plant it, that's neat.
It's easy to get seeds, and they're easy to grow.
Yeah, and they're just a cool flower. But if you're needing a little help in the department of, you have a lot of pest species, so you're trying to attract predatory wasps, which will, help you control those pest populations. Boneset is a great one. Rattlesnake master, which looks very alien to here, it's really cool. Mountain mints, which is what this is, and this is in this picture. So it's a vigorous grower, it's, in that mint family, and then goldenrod, stiff goldenrod, and swamp milkweed. And you're doing double duty with the milkweeds because they also support the monarch cockatiel, right?
So what can we do that will attract or get rid of the Japanese beetles? I heard, this may be a wives' tale, that if you plant geraniums, it doesn't kill them, but it makes them a little loopy. And then they're easier for birds to get to. I don't know if that's true or not, I mean,
I'm gonna have to look that up, I've never heard that, but,
I didn't know birds would go get them.
right, I
I
don't,
don't think they're running around the ground going,
because they've got that hard so normally when we talk about Japanese beetle control, I talk about grub control instead, because that's their vulnerable stage, the larval stage. And now there's milky spore, that takes years, and that's also a BT product, just like the mosquito dunks are, it's just a different species. So, controlling the larva is probably what I would focus on a little bit more, and that might be why you also have a lot of moles or voles, because those are eating the grubs in the
soil.
But the voles won't eat the grubs, right? Because voles are vegetarians, moles will eat them.
Yes.
I'm just studying a lot. My husband says the dynamite's
You're getting
next.
so good. You're getting so well versed in this. Not that you wanted to be, but you're forced to, that's okay sometimes.
That's the thing about gardening.
Right. So here's, oh, I'm sorry, question, sorry.
No, so what about rabbits?
So, rabbits.
Well, are any of these native plants like not consumed by rabbits?
You know, it really depends on how desperate they are, right? So, and the same thing with deer. Are there any deer-proof plants? I can only think of one because it's poisonous to deer. But it depends on how hungry they are. If they're hungry enough, they'll eat the bark off of trees and shrubs and whatever. So I guess it depends on how bad your rabbit population is. But yes, we do have, I didn't bring it with me. But I'll send it to you, a list of native plants that are resistant to deer and rabbits. Yeah. It's on the Home and Garden Information Center website, but I'll share it with you, a link to it. And you'll notice a lot of plants that I talk about might also be in that list. So a lot of the mints tend to be on that list because they don't like the strong flavor of it, right? So mints tend to be really good. Wild columbine is one that they don't like. No hostas, because that's like candy.
But not all hostas.
Not all,
I have like
golden heart too.
five different types and the deer just keep eating the same ones down, like the leaves can't keep
They're
up.
creatures of habit, just
And
like us.
I do find that rabbits will, they'll leave something totally alone, so you'll think, oh, that's safe, I'll plant more of that.
Yeah.
And then they start eating it.
Exactly, it's how desperate they are.
Well, and so when you're at my house, when we do, I'll have some things out so you can see tricks you can use. Like there are these metal waste baskets you can get at the dollar store. You can get like a dozen for $1 each. And I use those when I'm planting, little small seedlings, you know, when you're just putting something really small in, I cover them to protect them. There's also a product I get from Amazon. Amazon's my friend. You can buy these wire panels, they're metal, about yay big, black, with holes about like this. They're about that tall and about this long. And you put them together using zip ties. And I've started doing that around anything that's newly planted. And anything that I notice that they're eating. So then I go through and I create these, just protection for the plants. And it's not even very noticeable. You might not even notice it until you see it. But they're just, and I use sprays that they're not supposed to like, and I use blood meal around, and it's not just like that either, and
How about the garlic blood?
I haven't tried garlic. I tried it,
Garlic, cayenne pepper, a lot of those products actually work, but they fade. And so you have to reapply them.
yeah.
And
Sometimes
sometimes
you
you
have
have
to
to
change to a different product too.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's an ongoing thing. I have been trapping rabbits. I got the little, heart trap, the small one for rabbit size. Works great, and they love apple slices. And so I'll put those in the garden. I've caught about 5 rabbits so far, and then I carefully transport them to another location.
Has it reduced the issue for you?
A little bit, but there's still a lot of babies running around.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah,
And I think it also depends on predator pressure as well. So when you live in a neighborhood like that, the predators are not, the foxes don't risk coming into those
We did
situations.
Woodstock for the longest
Oh,
time, and I've not
nice.
seen him, and so far this season.
Lynn, you just need to borrow my hats for a week.
Yeah.
They celebrated Easter by
Literally
putting an
sit
entire
on the deck rail and peer around, and I know he would have gotten a rabbit if there had been one. There's some are about like this, some are about like this.
Yeah.
So it's a different range, but it works, and they're super easy to do.
Yeah, so barriers, repellents, those are, and I actually thought of this after we were talking about voles last week, but I know some recommendations, because they're more surface tunnelers, is you do kind of a layer of sharp rock, like not river rock, but like a sharper rock, and doing a layer of that kind of around the base of plants where they're attracted to, they don't like, they won't go through the sharp rock, they don't like it. And bury it just enough so that they can't, go under it, because they tunnel on the surface. Now, moles, that wouldn't apply to because they're not plant feeders, so. So anyways,
You ready to switch?
yes, we're ready to switch. So, this is, I found one caterpillar for today. It's still a little early in the season. I did look for some other caterpillars.
Moving. I
He
keep
does,
trying
he's
to get him. There he is.
He's doing an excellent job for being a little guy.
you already found
Yeah, he's been just chowing down.
And I looked for eggs, and I couldn't, the eggs are really teeny as well, so it could have been, I just couldn't see them well enough. But
Yeah, he's little.
I did find this guy. So this is a monarch caterpillar, and I'll pass him around in person, but I wanted to make sure, everybody online, can you see the caterpillar? He's cute.
So you already have monarch butterflies in your garden?
This isn't my garden, but yes, I even saw a monarch as I was searching for this guy.
I was wondering if maybe the eggs can stay and the larvae can hatch in the following season.
No, not usually. No, they don't normally overwinter here. They move. They're
Yeah,
migratory.
I thought monarchs came through here in the late summer, early fall.
Well, they do. Yeah, but their eggs won't. Their
Everything's
eggs won't
earlier
make
this
it.
year, maybe they're early too.
And no, there's a lot that will overwinter as pupa. So the adults are, and that's probably what's happening here is if they've overwintered here, they're overwintering as pupa, and then they come out and then they lay their eggs. So it takes some time. They're just getting warmed up here.
What kind of leaf is this?
This is milkweed. Yeah. So and that's why yeah, that's the
I
common
know.
milkweed. It's huge. And so I bring it because this is a specialist feeder. So the caterpillars can feed exclusively on milkweeds. It's the only, it's the only plant it will be able to eat. So while the butterfly can feed from a variety of different flowers, you don't have to have just milkweed for the butterfly. But look at him, he's not real big, right? He's not a lot to go through because as you notice, he's teeny tiny. They'll grow to be like 3 inches long or so. They get to be big fatties. And so he's got a lot of.
He looks like an inchworm right now.
I
It's hard
know,
for
he's
you
so
to see.
cute.
He's little, tiny.
And like we were kind of talking about before everybody came in, so much diversity because these caterpillars will look bigger, look different as they get bigger as well. And you'll notice other species of caterpillars, the wee ones look very different from the big ones, like totally different. You'd think they were different species. Black swallowtail is a good example of that. They go through several instars, which is stages, so they shed their skin between those instars, and so they'll change appearance as they get bigger. So this doesn't even really look like a monarch caterpillar yet, as we think of them, because we're used to seeing them kind of big. But he's starting to get more and more every day.
I love the fact he doesn't care where he is, just as long as
Oh,
I have
yeah, and you'll notice everyone, I think what we were doing when you were, yep, there we go. So sometimes if you tap on the table or it feels a disturbance, they'll rear up and they'll actually like throw their head back, and that's a deterrent
It looks
to predators. Yeah, because they're like warning off.
That's a scary face.
So cute. And again, what's interesting is this coloration they've developed as a warning signal to birds to let them know they are toxic. And that's true because milkweeds are full of latex and alkaloids. Oh yeah, see there he did it. It is that defense mechanism. You probably heard me talking about it. And so that defense, that's a defense mechanism is saying to the world, I taste really bad. And it's true, if birds eat these, they usually are not palatable to them. That doesn't mean they don't have other predators. Now I'm gonna pass him around, just be gentle, and you'll notice all these little black specks, that's his poop. There's a fancy word for it, it's called grass. So, if you really wanna get fancy, you can call it insect grass.
Grass?
Grass with an X. It rhymes with grass. So anyway, so this is what, this is why he'll end up looking like, and they do go through a ton of plant material. And I don't normally advocate for rearing them, in captivity. I'll release him back to where I found him.
So
you
your
can have
kids are gonna
permanent-
talk you into keeping him.
What's that?
Your kids are gonna talk you into keeping.
I'm not gonna let him know I have it. We'll get him at home eventually, but I didn't have any on my plants, so I looked elsewhere. But anyway, so
What birds can eat them?
what birds can, I don't even know actually. I don't think many, if any. Yeah, because they're like I said, they're toxic. So even if they do eat them, they'll just throw them back up. So it doesn't mean they won't try eating them though. I think young blue jays are the worst offenders because they'll eat them and then throw them back up.
But birds will typically eat other caterpillars.
They will, yeah. So, but usually that's why I say young birds because they don't know yet. They learn by trial and error. But yeah, other caterpillars will be eaten by birds. And I don't know if I have pictures of
At
them.
this stage, it looks almost like a larva.
It is the larval stage. Yeah. But he's already eating that milky sap and latex, so he's full of alkaloids already. It's like, and their eggs are so teeny tiny. When they first emerge, you can barely see them. So cute. So cute. I'll put them back under here, even though. So anyway, so they do end up growing up and they will defoliate milkweed. That's okay. That's its purpose, right? Like if something isn't eating what's in my garden, it's not really serving a purpose. Now Japanese beetles, I don't want to feed those, but you know.
Is that a different kind of milkweed? Because that looks closer to what I have. Mine doesn't.
Oh,
These kind of leaves.
this is not milkweed.
No,
This is just verbena. But that is swamp milkweed or rose milkweed is another name for it. And it has a much more, I think, a pretty color, really.
The one on the bottom, though, where all the.
Oh, the bottom, this is also swamp milkweed, so it has, you'll
That
notice.
must be what I have.
Yeah, the leaf I pass around is huge, that's common milkweed. The swamp milkweed is narrow, but it will feed on both of them. It just needs that genus, Asclepius is the genus. Which is on this list. So, like I said, there are caterpillars that are specialist feeders. So they need these host plants in order to lay their eggs and have larvae. The butterfly can go feed elsewhere, that's fine. And you do want to attract them to your landscape when these things are not in bloom. So that's why it's good to have seasonal stuff. But we saw the monarch. Now the spicebush swallowtail is also exclusive to spicebush, Lindeer benzoin. And that's one I have a picture of in the next slide, I believe. Zebra swallowtails, beautiful. They look exactly like a zebra in pattern. They need pawpaws, which is a native fruit that we have around here. But you'll notice that they have these host plants, so if we want to have the butterflies, we need the host plants, right? And you'll notice that these are different types of plants. It's not like they're all just trees or all just flowering perennials. You have a mix of things. You have violets and pussy toes, which are ground covers. You have pawpaw and spicebush, which are, a little bit taller. So that's where variety is the spice of life. So these are the fritillarias, and honestly, I challenge you to find a cooler looking caterpillar. Looks like a Halloween caterpillar, but the chrysalis is iridescent, so it actually has metallics in it. Monarchs do a little bit as well, but nothing compares to that. It is such a cool find when you find one of these. And the butterfly is kind of so-so, I think, but the caterpillar and the chrysalis, unparalleled. And they are pretty exclusive to the passion flower vine, but they also do May-apples, which is common everywhere around here. I think, did I have that right? Yeah, May-apples, yep. And there's some more examples. So here's the zebra swallowtail. Again, it's one of my favorite butterflies. And then here's the black swallowtail. These are the ones that feed of members in the carrot family. So dill, parsley, what's another one? Help me out. Fennel. And we also have a native carrot called Zizia aurea.
Yeah.
But I don't see them cover that as much. I think the leaves are too tough.
I haven't lately, but when
Yeah.
the first time I planted some,
Oh,
they were
really?
all over 'em.
Oh, really?
I took
Okay.
pictures of it. Lately though, I've got a lot of it, so it's kind of hard to keep.
Right.
I see a lot of black swallowtails, and I don't have any of those.
Yes, and it's probably because we plant a lot of dill and parsley and stuff in our yards, so it's more commonly found. So we tend to find them a little bit more.
No, I mean, we don't plant.
Oh,
any
you
of the
don't
plant-
plant?
We don't
Okay.
have any of those plants,
Oh.
and we see black swallowtails all the time.
Maybe your neighbors
So-
though, or.
Must have, yeah.
We've got something they like.
So here's the spicebush swallowtail caterpillar. You'll notice it has two false eyes. These are not the real eyes, and that's another predatory or response to predators is trying to tell them, hey, I can see you. I don't know if that stops birds from picking at it, but they'll also fold over the leaves. So I'm actually holding the leaf open in this picture, but that's a good way to be able to spot them, is to look at a spice bush, and if you see folded leaves, I always take a peek, see what's in there. When they are younger, when the caterpillar is smaller, they actually look like bird poop. That's another defense mechanism, because it obscures them, it hides them. Because when they're really small, they're probably very powerful to birds, but if I saw bird poop, I would probably leave it alone too. All right, so what can we do at home? Provide a variety of nesting grounds, and so when we talk about native bees in particular, about 70% of native bees are what we call ground nesting, so they dig a hole in the ground, or they're in leaf litter or something like that. The other 30% need a cavity, a hole. And a common one that we talk about here is mason bees. They're probably one of the more frequent native bees we have. And they like a certain size hole. So this one is specific to mason bees. Now this one, even though it looks fancier, I don't like it as much because you have a variety of different holes. And that means some mason bees won't fill these holes because they're too big. They also are open on both sides. And what woodpeckers and other predators do is they'll come in behind the sealed tubes where there's larvae, and they'll pick at them and they'll pick out the larvae. I like this one a little bit better because it has a solid back to it. Now, an alternative to what you can do here is put something solid on the back that can't get through there.
Now, what is that? It looks like cinnamon sticks, but what is it?
No, they're bamboo. They're bamboo.
Okay.
But bamboo isn't the only thing that has hollow stems. I have a whole slide dedicated to hollow stems.
Do they, how often, I used to have some little nests around on the
Yeah.
fence, and they'd fallen since, but they would get filled up.
Yep.
And I always wondered what would happen in the spring, do they break out?
Yep, so if you see a sealed mud hole, basically, it means it's being occupied. Now, if it doesn't clear out within a certain number of time, either the larvae are, not viable, or they just aren't going to emerge at that point. But if you see the mud sort of broken out of, it means something came up. And usually mason bees are active in the spring, so if by like mid to late summer, the seal is still on there, it's probably not alive.
Will another bee reuse one of those holes?
Sometimes they will come back, but for sanitary reasons, I say if you can cycle them out, that's better. Which is why, I'll talk about some like logs that you can drill holes in, and then after they're done being used, you can recycle the wood somewhere else. Because they can vector parasites and diseases that way. But what some people will do is they'll build something like this, but they'll use paper tubes, like straws, paper straws, and then they just toss it out.
I noticed Gardener Supply has a little bee thing, and they sell the tubes separately.
Yeah.
So you can
Yeah.
refill it with the tubes.
Yeah, and then they'll do the paper straws as like inserts and something else, and that's a really easy way to clean them. It's actually, if you have the time to kind of do that. Do we have a question on that?
We do, Mary does,
Yeah.
but she didn't tell me what it is.
Okay. Mary? Do you have a question, Mary? She might have had to step away. Feel free to jump in, Mary, if you have a question. So some other things we can do, avoid soil disturbance. So that's a lot of the tilling that we talked about. Even when you're adding compost and things like that, you can just layer it on top, use it as like a mulch layer, and that'll still improve the soil layers without having to do any tilling or disturbing, because that disturbs their nests and their holes. Yeah.
She just unmuted, so she may be ready.
You ready, Mary? Okay. Maybe,
Mary, can you type in the question maybe?
some other things insects like are leaving snags or dead wood if it's not harmful to the house, right? Like your house takes precedence and your safety also takes precedence. So if you have to take it down, like you have to take it down.
What's a snag?
A snag is a dead tree. Or, like if a tree falls into the water, it becomes a snag because it dies, but then it also sits in the water. And that's great for aquatic life too. Brush or rock piles, and bees actually love rock piles, and so you can almost be like sculpturing in here. You can really do a lot of creative things with these without making it look, neglected or messy. And then mulch consciously, and I'll talk about that in a little bit.
Oh, she said, never mind, you already addressed the question.
Oh, okay, excellent. So here's an example, I like this one because this is a stump. I never know really what to do with a stump. So what this person did is they cut it high, and then they drilled the holes for the cavity nesting bees in it. So it's kind of like a built-in hotel. And then I guess, if it gets too cruddy or it starts to fall apart, you can always just kind of cut it flush to the earth. But it adds a little bit of sculpture to me in a landscape like that. Here are we call these honey pots, but they're bumblebee nests. And they're kind of waxy, but they're not the same as honeycomb. And they built these little pots to raise and rear their larvae in. And they do this on the ground. And so it'd be very easy to disturb that if you raked away the layers of leaves. They need that protection, not just for their nests, but to overwinter as well.
Do those also look like so maybe I've been disturbing those and not realizing it, but do they look like a fungus that grows? I mean, they get this thing that looks very similar, but I don't think
No,
it's.
I think that's called bird nest fungus, which looks kind of similar.
Okay.
I could see why you would think that, but you would see a lot of bumblebee activity if it were their nests. I would just observe it for a little while, but it's probably that
I think it's
fungus.
I think you're right, okay.
But good question, yeah.
What time of year are birds going to fill those straws?
What, the bees?
Oh, yeah, maybe bees, yeah.
Usually in the spring, it depends on what it's for. So this is, I believe, for mason bees. It's just kind of like that house I passed around. It's just used bamboo. So they'll be doing that in the spring. That's when they're active in mating, and then they'll do it again in the fall. I'm sorry, they're active at those two different seasons the most. But in the fall, they'll lay their larvae or their eggs, because that's how they'll overwinter. But pregnant females, mated females, will also overwinter, so it is kind of confusing.
So where would you, in our neighborhood?
Yeah.
Because we know that one.
Yeah,
Where would you hang, I'm thinking a great project for grandkids to stuff
this
the,
is perfect.
stuff the straws in. I don't know that they're gonna see anything at the end, but where would you put those so they could overwinter?
Anywhere where you can hang them. I mean, like, you can put it on the side of a house, you can hang it from a tree branch. If you wanted to keep it away from like the swing set, you might like put it in the woods or something. But you could put it on the ground, but I think you're gonna find more predatory things going after it, because they're cabin dwelling, so they're gonna be kind of up high. So I would say like 3 feet or higher, and they'll find it.
Would it be better to put it like in a shady area? Because especially if you're doing a tin can.
Not necessarily. Painted like this, it's probably not as much of a problem. But if it's hanging from a tree, it's probably seeing shade. Yeah, shade is probably better. That's what I was just gonna say. Is this is a great project to do with like kids and grandkids because it's super easy. You know nothing's gonna come in the backside because it can't bust through that metal. You can paint it, you can decorate it, make it look fun, super cheap and easy, and it provides a little bit of habitat for the bees.
And that's where you can use paper straws for example.
Yeah, you can do paper straws instead. And if you use paper straws though, you want it to be in an area that is kind of waterproof so that the rain doesn't disintegrate all the paper tubes. So maybe under an overhang or something. Or you just cut them short enough and put them in that it's kind of recessed into the can.
Put a little porch roof.
I have a ton of cut up bamboo. I'll bring some by just for this purpose. So here's a cute little bee butt. I couldn't resist. So these are what hollow stems do, or this is how they kind of set up shop. Is they go to stems that are broken off, usually older stems too. And this is also from Xerces Society. Really helpful graphic to kind of give you an idea of how they use these seasonally. So in the spring, early spring, you're cutting back your stalks, you're leaving like 18 to 24 inch high stems, okay? And then the female bees start to nest in those stems, they'll go down deep. And you leave everything in place. So the summer, you know, the new growth comes up, you won't even see the stubble, you won't even see it, okay? And the bees are busy developing. And I forget what species this is for, I don't know if it's anything specific. And so then in the winter, you leave again, you leave all the stems, you're not clearing anything away, and they're hibernating in those stems. And then in the spring, that's where you're starting to see the original stems they're emerging from.
So
And
it
then
takes about a year?
I mean, not a full year, but yeah, it takes them a long time. They're not like honeybees. Honeybees only take like, what, 21 to 28 days to complete their life cycle? Yeah, very different.
So one of the things that's really handy about cutting them back is that it makes it easier to find the plant.
Right. And you'll notice some stems follow, and they do biodegrade. You don't think they will, but they really do break down pretty quickly. You can see this stem is pretty far
Well,
along.
and some stems are better because like an aster, when you cut that, there's a hole in it already. So,
Right. So here you go. There's your sealed bamboo. And that's how you know there's something cooking in the oven. And this is our carpenter bees. So you can get a good shot of what that bee tunnel looks like. She's like, yeah, I don't want to. So what they do, and they're huge, okay? So keep in mind, carpenter bees are huge. This is the pupa, so it's almost done pupating at this point. It's about ready to emerge. There's a little bit of like bee bread, it's basically gummed up pollen for them to eat. And then here's that larva that's continuing to develop. So you'll see different life stages, but they'll build chambers in a long line and then lay their eggs that way. And in fact, some bees are so smart that they will lay their eggs in a line like this, but they'll do the female eggs in the back, and then they'll do their male eggs in the front, because predators are more likely to eat the things in the front, and the male bees are expendable. So the female bees are where, you know, like life happens, and so they're smart to leave their females in the back and their males in front.
Well, it's kind of like carpenter bees, like we constantly have them tunneling it, and it's
Right.
pressure treated wood, it's full of chemicals.
I know.
And it
Well,
doesn't seem to bother them at all.
most new wood is not chemical, it's just pressure treated, so it's, you know, food safe, so to speak, so it's not necessary, but older wood,
Pressure treated wood for outdoors is soaked in chemicals,
Is
that's
it
why
really?
it doesn't rot, yeah. Like if you're gonna build a deck, you want pressure treated wood.
I know that it's wet when you get it because we put some up and we couldn't paint it because it's still oozing whatever it has
Oh.
soaked in.
Well, that could be if it sits outside, that can
it's like
happen either
sweating
way.
or something.
But,
Yeah.
yeah, like if you're gonna make a deck, and that's what they mold the board into.
Right,
So, and I'm amazed that they don't, it doesn't.
right, well, it might not right away, right, the exposure might over time, but they don't live.
I don't know, they're there every year, so.
Yeah. All right, so plants with pithy stems. So these are stems that are going to be hollow. Raspberries are great for that, and elderberry, Joe Pye weeds. A lot of grasses have hollow stems too, but they're often for little bees because they're very, very, very small.
What about like daylilies, cause they have.
They
That's
do,
nice.
but I tend not to
Those-
recommend daylilies
Okay.
because of their invasive habits. But you're right, if you could use the stems, like if you cut them up, the dead stems, yeah, they would probably use those too. What I do not recommend planting is bamboo, but you can use dead bamboo that's like cut up, just like we talked about. And then Japanese knotweed, princess tree, and any other kind of invasive plants, right? Lots of options to choose. This isn't even the, you know, the full list. And I also like to do my little public PSA about leaving the leaves for a number of reasons. You know, number one, there are so many things that overwinter in the leaf litter. Can you even see what's in this picture? What's in the leaf litter? It's kind of like a Where's Waldo. So right here, we have a lot of native bats, and this is the little red bat.
Wow.
And they will often hibernate in leaf litter, or sometimes in the winter they'll fall down into leaf litter and it'll take them a while to. Where is it? It's right here. So this is its folded up wing. There's its little ear. It's this little fuzzy red bat. And so they use leaf litter as an insulator. They'll also use trees, like they'll hang from trees and stuff, but when they hibernate, it's often they need that insulating layer. What else do we see? This is a cocoon. And it's a cocoon of a big group of moths called the silk moth family. So Luna moth, you might be familiar with, the really big, pretty moths, they all use leaf litter to overwinter. And so we often don't even see them. Like you probably wouldn't notice that because it's wrapped up so completely. If you clear that leaf litter, there goes the cocoon. That's how they overwinter. And there's your Luna moth, gorgeous. And then you can see the little bumblebee here. I know we already discussed that that layer of leaves, that duff layer, super important to insulate those bees. In particular, bumblebees, because they nest and hibernate right in the ground, or right on top of the earth. So they need something to bump at them. Now, there are exceptions to leaving the leaves, and that's usually disease, if you have leaves that are diseased, or leaves that are just so overly thick that they're smothering everything else that's on, they're laying on top of.
But oak, this is the ongoing argument at our house. My husband wants to get rid of all the leaves. I keep saying, leave them.
If you and I know a lot of oak leaves create like a really thick layer, but they do break down over time. So if you can leave them, that's great. Now I know some people chop up the leaves, but then you're in the same situation as removing them, right? You're harming the little organisms in here. And they do break down pretty quickly. I know a lot of people worry about their grass. I have maples, and those leaves, they basically disintegrate in the wind. They biodegrade very quickly, and it provides organic matter that we want on the earth. The irony is, we worry so much about clearing out the leaves, but then we go and purchase compost and put it back on the earth. That's what the leaves are doing if you just leave them. So there you go. That's my little soapbox about leaves, but I'm happy. And there's always exceptions to the rule, right? I'm not saying it works for everybody. And beetle banks. I don't talk about this a whole lot, but since we have the time to talk about it today, these are actually mounded rows of earth planted with usually native grasses or perennials, and they provide refuge for ground beetles and other predatory beetles that help control slugs and pest populations. And these are supposed to be undisturbed. So these are this concept of beetle banks is usually for agriculture because they're created as a row in between crops or in the middle of crops to help as part of an IPM program or a pest management program. So those are soil rows that do not get disturbed at all. They don't get tilled or anything, and they don't get sprayed. The idea is that you're not using pesticides in this area because they are sensitive to it. Ground beetles are totally underrated because they do a lot of services for the environment. So here's the concept of beetle banks. This is what it would look like in agriculture. Is you have this little mound, and then you have the crops on either side, and they're refuges, not just for beetles, but for all insects. You think about you come in and till the soil, or you're disturbing that habitat. Those insects need a spot to kind of relocate to, right? So it's a great concept. I don't see why we couldn't use that in home landscapes either. So keep that in your mind. That's kind of a new.
It needs to be mounded.
The idea is it's mounded because it creates a drier environment, and they can't live in a depression where it's super wet. So if it's too flat or it's actually concave, it ends up being too wet and they can't survive there.
What kind of grasses would you use?
Native grasses that can survive that drought. So like prairie dropseed, little blue stem, anything. I wouldn't do anything that gets really, really tall, like Indian grass, or even switchgrass. Yeah, probably not. But little blue stem's great. Prairie dropseed is one of my favorites. It's cute. It's a cute little bunch grass. And that's the idea too. Is those bunch grasses also provide refuge for other insects that are ground nesting or dwelling. Including lightning bugs, right? I haven't brought them up yet, but I threw this slide in here because this is actually a day-flying lightning bug. And this is a common one here in Maryland. I think they're called black firefly. Yeah, so you'll see them flying during the daytime. But I bring it up because the larva fireflies take up to 2 years sometimes in order to finish pupating and developing. So the reason we might not see fireflies as much anymore is because we've disturbed their habitat, but they also take so long to develop from the egg and then make it to an adult that many don't make it, right? But the larvae of fireflies are also really good predators of slugs and worms and kind of those other insects. So incredibly beneficial. Another really good plug for having undisturbed habitat for insects like this to develop and continue bringing joy into our lives, but also environmental benefits. So it's really, really cool. And we actually have a really cool endangered firefly in Maryland that only lives, I think it's Cape Henlopen. And it might even be called the Cape Henlopen firefly. And there's a lot of really interesting studies and research just on that species around the area. So that's always kind of a cool thing to say. All right. How are we doing on time? So we've got plenty of time, but I wanted to make sure that
Before it's over, actually.
Oh, I'm
We're
sorry.
gonna lose our Zoom in a second.
4 minutes over. Oh, well, perfect.
That's all right.
Excellent.
I saw how many slide, or slide you had.
No